Hi, welcome everyone to today's video of improvement in food resources. This is the second video of chapter 15 NCERT CBSE biology, and this is the final chapter from the CBSE syllabus. In my previous video for the improvement in food resources, we had talked about the means through which we can get improved varieties or improved production seed producing varieties. So we had discussed about the hybridization techniques and we had discussed about the genetically modified crops. In today's video, we'll be talking about the crop production management. When we talk about the crop production, we know that India is basically an agriculturally based country. Most of the Indian population depend on agriculture. And as the financial amount or the financial holdings vary from person to person, so also the amount of the land holdings. Based on the financial availability of each farmer, the production or the cost of production also varies for their particular land holdings. So based on the amount that they can spend for the cost of production, the production has been divided into three major parts, that is no cost production, low cost production and high cost production. For a low cost or the no cost production, we can understand it is done at a minimal level with minimal amount of money involved, with no modern facilities, no particular improved tools or machines, and also not improved varieties or seeds. It is done at a very minimal cost or minimal expenditure, and even the turnover or the amount or the yield that we get out of it is also very minimal. Whereas in a high cost production, we can understand lots of money gets involved, due to which a high yield is also expected as they use the best quality seeds, the improved varieties, all the modern machineries, tools and the modern ways of agriculture. So based on the financial holdings, the crop production is divided into no cost, low cost and high cost production. But when we talk of production, we are basically or we mean the yield of the crop. When it is the yield of a crop, we can understand that in order to get a proper yield from a plant, it has to have all the things properly. That is, the first thing that comes to our mind is food, because we living beings always depend on food. When the food is adequate, food is proper, food is nutritious, obviously the person or the living being has to be healthy. So for the plants also, in order to have a proper growth, a proper yield, they have to be healthy and they have to be given proper nutrition. Now plants require 16 essential nutrients are required for their growth and development. Now out of the 16 essential elements that is required for the plant growth, 3 is supplied from the air and water. Water supplies earth or the plants with hydrogen, and oxygen and carbon dioxide is supplied by that of air. The rest 13 essential elements or nutrients that is required by the plants is supplied by soil. Now we have told that the water provides the plant with hydrogen. So water is an important essential factor for every living being. So even plants need to be given water at the required stages. Now India being a rain-fed country, during the monsoons, the crop production or the production that is taken up is always or mostly dependent on rain. During the other periods or during the other time, that is when there is not ample amount of rainfall, the crop production is based or depends on irrigation. It is dependent on timely monsoons and sufficient rainfall. Therefore, measures have to be taken to bring more and more agricultural land under irrigation, because it sometimes so happens that rainfall is erratic. We do not get rainfall at the required time and at the proper time and even in proper quantity. So if the crops or the fields are under irrigational system, they can be watered anytime required and with as much amount as required. So irrigation is a very important thing because monsoon we have to depend on nature, which is really not done. So in order to have a proper irrigation, that is an important cause for a proper production management. And finally is the cropping pattern. That is different ways crops can be grown, and that has to be kept in mind when a farmer or when a piece of land is kept under cultivation or is taken up for cultivation. That is the cropping pattern. The crops which are being sown has to be kept in mind. How long they take for maturity, that has to be taken in mind. Even the amount or the nutrient which they prefer, that also has to be kept in mind. So moving on to the nutrients or the nutrients that is supplied by the soil. We had told that air provides the plant with carbon and oxygen, whereas water provides the plants with hydrogen. And I told 13 essential more elements are there which is required by the plants. Now some elements are required more in quantity by the proper growth and development of the plants, and they are called as the macronutrients. And some elements are there which are required in traces for the plants, but they are still very important for a plant's growth, and they are known as micronutrients. So what are the macronutrients that we are talking of? That is nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, calcium, magnesium and sulfur. So that is nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, calcium, magnesium and sulfur. That is 6 essential elements constitute the macronutrients. While micronutrients constitute of iron, manganese, boron, zinc, copper, molybdenum and chlorine. Now deficiency of any of these elements in the soil can cause different effects on the plant's growth. It can affect the reproduction or reproduction cycle of the plant. It can affect the growth. It can lead to the susceptibility of the plant to different diseases and pests. So to increase the yield, the soil needs to be enriched with all these macro and micronutrients, which are all food for the plants. Now, along with the macro and the micronutrients which we are talking of, we cannot supply them in the form of elements. But what we have to do in order that the plant gets all these macro and micronutrients, we supply some kind of chemicals or fertilizers and manures to the plant or the crops in order for a healthy growth. Now when we tell that fertilizers and manures are given, we put these two terms separately. So we have to understand that fertilizer and manure, they are two different terms and have two distinct meanings. So when we tell fertilizer or when we tell manure, we must know exactly what do they mean or why they have been termed so. So when it is a fertilizer, it is a commercially produced substance. It is not a natural thing. It is produced in factories and industries, whereas manure is a natural substance. So this is the first basic difference of fertilizer and manure. The second is chemicals that are added to the soil to increase the fertility and productivity. Now, when we are producing fertilizer, as I told you, they are man-made and they are produced in factories. So all the chemicals or all the nutrients that are required by the soil are required by the plants are supplied separately in the fertilizer, so the plants get all of the micro and macronutrients. Whereas in manure, it is not so. what we do is manure is prepared from the dead and decaying plants and animals. Mostly the dried leaves, the rotten leaves, vegetable peels, the fruits, food peels, and all those are put together along with the soil and all with that of the earthworms. It gives rise to manure. It is a long run process. It takes time because manure needs to get prepared naturally. We cannot do it. It is not a man-made thing. So it does not provide humus to the soil. What happens? It does not provide what after some time the fertilizer actually gets washed off because it does not increase the fertility. It just provides nutrition to the plant and then it is done. Whereas for manure, it provides humus to the soil. It does not only provide nutrition to the plants, but it also enriches the soil. Rich in plant nutrients, whatever nutrients is required by the plants, it supplies that in ample amount to the plants. It is rich in plant nutrients. What it does, it increases the fertility and this plant might get the required nutrients or might not get the required nutrients, but it increases the soil fertility absorbed by plants very quickly. So because it supplies the exact amount required by the plants, all the nutrients, so the plant absorbs it very fast, whereas the plants take a long time to absorb the manure or the naturally prepared ones. It is quite costly because it is developed man-made and it requires many chemicals which are added to it, which added up the cost of the fertilizer, whereas manure is purely man-made and so it is quite cheaper. It harms the organisms present in the soil and also causes health issues in people. It causes no harm to the organisms and improves the soil fertility. That's what I was telling, that fertilizer gives the instant nutrients to the plants, but it is not good for a healthy soil. It also affects the microorganisms that is living in the soil, like that of the earthworm. It might be the ants, it might be the snails or some other organisms. But in case of manure, it is a naturally made done and so it does not affect the soil fertility or also the other microorganisms which are there in the soil. So this is actually very important part of the improvement in crop food resources. So this difference, we must learn it properly and we must know it thoroughly and we must have a clear idea about the differences between a fertilizer and a manure, because both are used for the same term or the same usage, but they are completely different from each other. If you want, you can take a snapshot of these differences so that we can go through it later and memorize it properly for the exams. Moving on to the next part, that is irrigation. I told you that India is mostly a rain-fed country, but due to scarcity of the rainfall and also the erratic rainfall, it is very difficult to come to a conclusion that will get the rain at the proper time and in proper amount. So it is very difficult, or it is rather very risky to depend on rainfall alone for a crop. So we must always have a backup, or it is best to go for the irrigation facility which will provide the crops with water when and where required, and that too in the proper amount. So it is told that there are several different kinds of irrigation systems that are adopted to supply water to the agricultural land depending on the kind of water resources that is available. Because everywhere it is not the same that the water is obtained from the river or from a pond somewhere nearby. Many times it so happens that there is no water stored. It is mostly the groundwater that we have to take in and use it for irrigation. So in that case, what it is done, we can use a well, that is a dug well or a tube well. That is, we have to dig into the ground, down into the ground for quite a long time, and then we get the groundwater. This groundwater is then taken up by different means, that is through tube well means it is taken out through pump, and through dug well means it is taken out manually in form of buckets. If the land is small, this is enough, but if it is a huge piece of land, it is not sufficient because this is totally manually done, which is very much cost effective, and also immense human labor is required. So we go for a tube well where everything is mechanized and done by a machine, and it can water huge areas of land. The next modes of irrigation are tank system and canal system. In both canal system and the tank system, pipes or tunnels have been drawn through which the water flows and it gives to the field that is required. For tank system, it is generally water is stored in the tanks or man-made tanks, or sometimes these are natural tanks or the big tanks which are there, where water, this is mostly the rainwater that gets stored here, and through the channels you can see it is taken and it is given or it is distributed into the fields when and where required. And finally, it is the river lift system. So what is the river lift system? It is nothing, it is basically some channels or some like this kind of channels have been drawn through which the river water flows, and this water goes and waters the field where it is required. Now, because it is the river water that is lifted from the river and it is taken or it has been sent through the chains or through the canals into the field, it is called a river lift system. That is, it lifts the river and river water and sends it to the field where it is required. So these are the different types of irrigational methods which are found or which are taken care of or which are followed in India in order to procure water for the fields for the proper growth of the crops and the plants. Now, in the field, when we are growing the plants, we also have to be very intelligent when planning for the field or growing of the plants. The field, many times it so happens that due to a continuous cropping or continuous growing of a particular crop, the soil loses its fertility and it's become barren. Because every time if we sow a particular kind of crop, that particular crop requires the same type of nutrients. So every time it takes the same nutrients from the soil and the soil loses that particular nutrient constitution. So we think of two types of cropping patterns which will give a cropping produce, that is a crop yield. Along with it, it will also maintain the fertility of the soil and also make the soil fertile and as well give us the crop produce for the financial need. So how this is done or how it is done? So what is done in order to maintain the fertility and also to grow the crop? So the two types of cropping patterns that is followed are mixed cropping and intercropping. The name suggests, or the name, when we hear the names, we think that it is mostly very similar type of cropping patterns, but no, it is a bit different. When we study both of them, we will understand that it is little different from each other. The first is mixed cropping, alludes to the method of cropping in which two or more crops are grown simultaneously in the same piece of land. And in intercropping refers to the process of cultivating crops. Different crops are cultivated together in a specified pattern. So we must always remember, in mixed cropping, there is no particular specified pattern is maintained. Whereas in intercropping, a specific pattern is maintained. That is, if it is crop A followed by crop B, again it is A followed by B. Whereas in mixed cropping, it is not so. The seeds are mixed and they are put into the soil so that every inch of land gets some kind of crops and some kinds of produce. So all are grown simultaneously in the same piece of land. It does not follow any pattern of sowing of seeds. I told you it does not follow any pattern of sowing, whereas it follows a definite pattern of sowing, how the seeds should be sown. Sometimes it's so done that first the crop A is grown. After 10 to 15 days, the crop B is sown. Sometimes it is B first, A later on. Sometimes it is grown together. Based on the types of the crops, those are selected for intercropping. But for mixed cropping, all are grown together at one point of time. The seeds are combined and sown. So the seeds are all combined together and then they are sown. Here seeds are not combined. The seeds are kept separate and even the sowing is separate. Same fertilizer and pesticides is applied to all of the crops. Here specific fertilizer and pesticides are applied to the crop. So you can understand that here same are applied to all of the crops because all the crop seeds are mixed together, put into the land. So a general fertilizer or pesticide or fungicide is applied to the whole particular piece of land. Here only for particular crop A, particular fertilizer or particular pesticide is applied, whereas for B, another type of fertilizer is applied. To minimize the risk of crop failure, to increase the productivity of the crop. Now what happens in mixed cropping, what the farmer thinks is that even if one crop fails, the other crops will grow and at least he will have something to go and sell it to the market. He will have some kind of produce. But in intercropping, it is done to increase the productivity so that the productivity of the crop is increased. The amount of produce from the crop, it increases. Competition between the crop always exists. Competition with the crop does not exist because each crop is given a separate place to grow and it is not mixed with the others. Whereas here everybody is mixed together. So only the best one or the fittest one will survive and it will be ending up in a crop yield. So these are very much different, the mixed cropping and intercropping, but both is very much required in order to maintain the fertility and also to maintain the overall financial gain for the farmers. This type of cropping patterns is very much necessary for the farmers to follow because no one wants the crop to fail and the investment that has been done for the raising of the crop in order to go off. So it is very important that at least some amount or some amount of money is obtained after the crop is harvested. So mixed cropping actually gives us some kind of produce, at least one crop produce for go and selling off into the market. Whereas in intercropping, the crops are managed separately, they are put separately, they are maintained separately with everything. So there is obviously it will give a produce and that too it will maintain the fertility of the soil. So this is the basic differences between mixed cropping and intercropping, and both of these cropping patterns are very important for a farmer to maintain its farming as well as the financial stability. So this, if you want, can take a snapshot and you can go through the points, because when we read it, we find it is very confusing and it is very much similar, mixed cropping and intercropping, but they are very much different in the sowing pattern, maintenance, as well as the productivity. So this is mixed cropping, that is all the seeds are taken together and they are put in a piece of land. Now from anywhere any seeds might come up. Whereas this is intercropping, a proper cropping method is followed, a proper place is given to each of the crops and seeds are not mixed together, they are kept one after the another, and also they are separately taken care of in order for fertilizer, irrigation and rest of it. Now coming to crop rotation. When we tell of crop rotation, that it is a practice of planting different crops sequentially on a land or a piece of land. So different crop combinations are taken up depending on the duration. So depending on the duration of the crop, different crops are taken up in order to maintain the fertility also and also the crop duration. A single piece of land can yield at least 2 to 3 harvests if planned properly. And how does it help us? It helps us to improve the soil health. It optimizes the nutrition of the soil and it also helps in combating the pest and weed pressure. To improve the soil health means supposedly in the first time we have taken up rice in a particular field. So what happens after it is removed or after it is harvested, we can immediately put some leguminous crop, the legumes which helps to fix the atmospheric nitrogen into the soil nitrogen. So what happens, it again regains back the soil fertility. So it improves the soil health, optimize nutrients of the soil, that is, it makes the soil rich in nitrogen, it gives the proper nutrition which is required for the soil, and also combat pest and weed pressure. What happens, that is, the pest which had come during when we had taken up for the rice, these pests will not be able to survive, and then immediately after that some leguminous crops are taken up. So what happened, the pest does not find a proper host because the rice has already been harvested and it is not again sown with rice. So the pests and the weeds that has come up, they face tremendous amount of pressure and slowly they die off. So what happened, it eradicates the pests also. That is, first moves to 1, 2, see this is 3, 4 and again 1. So first it is crop A, crop B, crop C, crop D, and again it moves to crop A. It is this way it keeps on rotating. So what happens, nothing becomes permanent. Not even the weeds, the insects, the soil fertility, it keeps on changing and it keeps on adding to the health of the soil. Like it is for potatoes, legumes and brassicas. Then again we can go for any cucurbits and corns, and then again some rooting crops. So this way we can take up the crop rotation, which can help us to increase the fertility, maintain the soil and also give us proper produce of the crops. Now we'll come on to crop protection management. When we talk of crop protection management, the field crops, they are infested by large number of weeds, insects, pests and diseases. So we have to remove this. So how to remove this? We can do it by cutting off the roots, stem and leaf. Sometimes suck the cell sac from the various parts of the plant, and they are also borne in the stems and the fruits. So these are the places, or these is where the particular weeds or insects and the pests affects that part of the plant. So what are the control measures in order to minimize the pests, diseases and the weeds? That is, the most common use method is the use of insecticide, pesticides. But we understand that due to this excessive use of this insecticides and pesticides, we actually harming the own health of human beings, because these pesticides and insecticides, they are all chemicals which comes and gets added to the crop, to the plants, and this produce has been taken up by the human beings, which indirectly gets affected to these insecticides and pesticides. So weed control methods must also include some mechanical removal, because the chemical problems, since they can be poisonous to living organisms and cause environmental pollution. So some removal control or mechanical control should be there for resistant, for stopping of the weeds and pests and the diseases. Now what are the preventive measures that has been taken in order to eradicate or in order to subdue the insects, pests and diseases? That is, preventive methods such as proper seed bed preparation should be done. That is, initially before sowing of the seeds, proper manure and proper nutrients should be added so that the plants, and even some type of seed treatment should be done so that the insects or the diseases, the pest, it does not come and infect the plants very fast. Timely sowing of the crops should be done. Intercropping and crop rotation should be taken up to help in the weed control. Use of resistant varieties should be done, and deep summer plowing to destroy weeds and pests. So all these preventive measures, if it is taken up, we can, if not eradicate, at least minimize the infestations of the insects, pests and diseases on the crop plants. Now we can finally come to the storage of grains. When we talk that after the crop has been yielded or harvested, the grains that we get, or the grains or the produce that we get, it is not always there that all the produce are immediately sold into the market. So what happens? The excess grains or the excess produce that is being produced by the farmers are stored. Now, even when we're storing the grains, even then also we can have problems of the insects, weeds, pests, and even for diseases. Because of that storage grains, that grains can also come affected due to insects and pests. So what should be done and what are the measures? So when it is some biotic measures should be, that is, the biotic means the infestation of insects. It can be rodents, fungi, mites, and bacteria. Whereas in abiotic conditions, it is appropriate moisture and temperatures in the places of storage. So abiotic means it is where we have kept the stored grains. Sometimes it so happen that the humidity is very high. The temperature is very low. Some things like that which help in the development of this fungus, mites, and also bacteria and the other insects and pests. So the abiotic factors can cause degradation in quality of the grains, loss in weight, poor germinability, discoloration, and poor marketability. It can affect the grain quality very much, and if once the grain quality gets affected, it is not able to get its proper market, because people don't tend to buy any grains which are affected by any insects or weeds or pests. So what are the control measures that we should be taking before storing of the grains? That is, strict cleaning should be done, proper drying of the produce in sunlight and in also the shade, and fumigation using chemicals that can kill the pests. Proper fumigation should be done in the places where the grains are stored. The seeds should be treated properly. The seeds should be stored properly. It should be a totally dry place where we are storing the seeds or grains, and also in between alternately fumigation should be done, so even if any pest or insect or fungus attack is there, that will be killed and the grains will be saved from that of any biotic and abiotic stresses, because these grains are the food for all the people or all the living beings. So these grains need to be kept properly even for the next year's produce and also to feed this huge population of our country. So this brings us to the end of the improvement in the food resources, the second part, where we have talked about the crop production as well as the crop protection management. That is how we can produce or get proper produce of the crop, and how can that produce be kept properly, maintained properly, stored properly for the future use. So after this, we will be coming up with animal husbandry. So this brings us to the end of the video, or the second video of improvement in food resources. If you have liked my video, please like, share and subscribe to my channel. Till then, take care, stay safe, and bye. I'll be coming up with my next video on animal husbandry. Thank you.